What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adam, this is Vancity Audi, and welcome to the very first video involved in my tuner battle on my MK8 GTI. Today we're going to be testing Stage 1 91 octane low torque files from 5 different companies. We have 034 Motorsport, Tunezilla, APR, Unitronic, and United Motorsport. Thank you all very, very much to each of them for trusting me to do this and for allowing me to test their software. I'm gonna have a bunch of disclaimers in each of these videos, and we'll get to those right now.
Buckle up, kids. It's time to learn a thing or two.
Disclaimer number 1. All dynos read differently. That's why if you go to each of these different companies' websites, every single reading on all of their dynos on a MK8 GTI, all of their stock power levels are different. They vary over 30 wheel horsepower. I think it's 37 to be exact, from the lowest to the highest reading. So just know that there are a ton of variables that come into play when looking at power generated on a dyno. The weather conditions, the elevation, the quality of fuel, the dyno brand, the calibration done on the dyno, so many different things. So just know that the power that we're generating today on this dyno might not be the same as everybody else's dyno figures at your particular dyno wherever you may live. You also need to take into account some dynos read power at the wheels, other dynos read power at the crank or brake horsepower. Those are not the same thing. Wheel horsepower does not take into effect the drivetrain loss that you're suffering. So when you have a crank horsepower or a brake horsepower readout on a dyno, they've added in your drivetrain loss. The dynos that I use in my videos read wheel horsepower. Disclaimer number 2, I cannot control the environmental conditions that we are testing in. I'll do the best that I possibly can to get through this testing from one tune to the next, so not too much time takes place between those runs, because if I wait too long and the temperatures get much higher, that means that it'll probably be at a disadvantage for those tunes that I'm testing later in the day. On some days we may get extremely lucky, where the temperature and the density altitude doesn't vary very much between the day. But other days you might start out at a very cold temperature, warming up throughout the day to a much warmer temperature. The tunes that you test in the morning might have an advantage over the tunes you test later in the day, simply due to those environmental conditions changing. Disclaimer number 3, this is simply a dyno test and nothing more. This does not account for drivability, smoothness, refinement, nothing. It is simply a 4th gear pull at wide open throttle from anywhere between 2,000 to 2,500 RPM all the way to red line. That's all you're really experiencing on the dyno, nothing else. Disclaimer number 4, I cannot be certain of the software that is being provided to me by any of these companies. You should know that APR, Unitronic, and 034 Motorsport all only offer canned or off-the-shelf software, whereas Tunezilla and United Motorsport do offer custom software, but I have specifically requested to only get off-the-shelf or canned tunes from each of these companies. Disclaimer number 5, I am running all OEM hardware. It's safe to say and safe to assume if I was then to install some aftermarket performance hardware, my car would make more power on each of these tunes. But just know that right now I am completely stock performance hardware. The only things I have installed in the car are cosmetic or things that make a bit of noise, like the CTS turbo muffler delete, as well as their blow-off valve. Number 6, my TCU is locked. I am sorry to say that at this present time, my 2023 Volkswagen GTI still has a locked TCU, meaning that there is a torque limitation set by the manufacturer that I cannot surpass. With that being said, I'm unable to see whether the tunes that are provided to me are going to be riding that torque limit, or whether they're going to be set at a safer, lower torque limit and possibly give me a flatter torque curve. I'm not exactly sure the limitations on this transmission with it being locked, but all I know is there is the possibility that some companies are riding that torque limitation. Maybe it's going to be up and down a bit, and other ones may have played it a bit safer on the low torque tunes and flatten that out at a lower level. Number 7 is that I will try my best to let the data speak for itself. Now, I could go out in the back roads of Mexico and give you subjective information, being how well the car drives, how refined it feels, but that's coming from my opinion. In these videos, I'll try my best to just let the data speak for itself. What we see in terms of power and torque on the dyno dyno running each of these different tunes. Number 8, the AFR or air to fuel ratio or lambda in each of these tunes may vary. Keep in mind that the leaner something might be in terms of AFR or lambda, it might make more power, but it might also affect the longevity of the motor itself. Whereas if a software company has decided to tune something on the richer side, the longevity of the motor might last a little longer. I'm not going to be sharing those or going over those in this video series. And number 9, I will not be sharing any of the data logs that I capture on my Mark 8 during this entire process with the public. The reason being is each of these companies spent a ton of time, money, and energy all creating their own version of the spicy sauce that they're using to make the GTI work as well as it does on each of their software. I don't think it's fair, and quite honestly, it would be disrespectful of me to put that out into the public. If you do want to know each of the logs, I highly suggest you purchase each of the company's software and test them for yourself. Now, in terms of how we're going to be testing today, each of these tunes, including the stock tune, is going to be getting 3 runs on the dyno. 2 back-to-back with a 5 to 10 minute cooling period where we just let the fans blow on the car and cool it down. Now you should know it is quite cool today. It's not very warm, so the intake air temps will certainly be lower than if we were to do this on a warm day. But no, everyone's getting the same treatment. 2 back-to-back runs, let the car cool, and then hit it for a 3rd run. The smoothest curve, not one that may have some weird peak that gives them a higher number. We're not going to use that one. We're going to be using the smoothest curve out of the 3 runs that we do. The dyno that we're using today is a Mustang all-wheel drive dyno, but we're going to be using DynoJet calibrated numbers. The reason for that is this Mustang dyno is a freaking heartbreaker and it reads really, really low. What we've seen in the past is the DynoJet calibrated numbers are very, very comparable to what APR did on their dyno. So yes, it may seem high to you, but just know it falls perfectly in line right in the middle between the lowest and the highest readings that all of the other companies out there have tested on their stock Mark 8 GTIs. You guys should also know that today we're going to be running Shell 91 octane fuel. That's their V-Power Nitro Plus formula. Let's get to the dyno. All right guys, stock power figures. We made 242 wheel horsepower, 283 wheel torque. This is the stock calibration, a little up and downs, and then it juts up at about 4,100 RPM, and then the torque falls off. Horsepower though is very, very flat from about 4,500 RPM and onwards. Now that you guys know the peak figures, I'm going to quickly explain what to look for when looking at a dyno graph, because a lot of people just look at the peak figures and nothing else. All of this needs to be taken into account though. These figures are only corresponding to the very highest point on the graph. So this 283 wheel torque only corresponds to that one point in time. You're making that much torque at only that spot. 242 wheel horsepower, you're only making it at that spot. Very small points in time. So you can't just solely go off of peak numbers. You have to also look at the torque curve. How flat is it? How long does it last? How high up in the RPM do you get it? The horsepower, does it keep climbing all the way to redline? Or in case of the stock tune, it's just flatlined all the way to redline. A lot of things to take into account when looking at a dyno graph. Now that we have those stock runs done, it is time to tune the car. What I've done to make this absolutely fair is I've printed out logos of each of the companies we'll be testing today. And all I'm gonna do is fold these papers up, mix them all around, and randomly pick one, and that's gonna be the order in which we go today. So what I'll do is I'll pick the very first one right now to see who we're gonna be tuning to first. So they've all been folded up. Obviously you can see the logos through the paper. So to prevent me from knowing, we're gonna toss them in here. I'm gonna mix them all around. Not the most scientific way, but it's the best I can do for you guys. And we're picking, and we're picking. We have picked Tunezilla. Tunezilla will be the first company that we'll be throwing on the car, and we can see what it can do in the dyno. is done, and holy freaking hell, 73 wheel horsepower, 99 wheel torque on Tunezilla software. Now I need to make mention so everybody is aware, they are a local company to me and they develop this software with our fuel. So they definitely know how to make the most of it, but I say that without seeing any of the other tunes. So for all I know, the other tunes could make more power than this and just blow me away. But I just wanted to make you guys aware. Here are the dyno graphs. You guys can see the comparison. Down low, you have the stock lines. Up high, you have Tunezilla's line. There is some definite up and down weirdness going on the torque up top on Tunezilla's tune between about 3,300 RPM and 3,700 RPM. Does the same thing down low or in the mid range on the horsepower, but up top, it's nice and clean. If you'd like to support the channel and you love what Tunezilla's doing, use promo code Vancity Audi at tunezilla.com and save yourself 15%. All right, Tunezilla's out of the way. Time for tune number 2. And what are we going with? APR, it looks like. We're going with APR. Tune number 2 that we're testing on the dyno is APR. Let's see what it can do. With the APR tune, we managed to gain 76 wheel horsepower and 61 wheel torque. More horsepower than Tunezilla, but less torque. Let's take a look at the graph now. Their torque line looks much better than Tunezilla's, but they still have a weird hump at about 3,500 RPM. The power band, what you get, 4 horsepower, does look smoother and more linear with APR. If you'd like to support the channel and you're digging what APR is putting down, head on over to the link in the description below and purchase your APR hardware and software. All right, let's see who's gonna go numero 3. We have United Motorsports. That's an easy one to see. United Motorsports, 3rd one on the dyno. Let's see how we do. United Motorsport putting in work. 83 wheel horsepower gain, the highest so far, with 81 wheel torque gain. This was a butter smooth run. Look at those lines. Now you do need to know though, this was the first run and it was the smoothest. They made more power on the next 2 runs, but they were quite up and down in terms of the smoothness of the graph. So know that they did run a couple more times, they did make more power, but this was the smoothest run. Only 2 more tunes to go. Unitronic 034, who's going next? Unitronic's up next. Let's see what they can do. And now to Unitronic, and sadly they made the lowest wheel horsepower of 57 wheel horsepower above stock, but the second highest torque at 87 wheel torque. Here's the graph. Sadly, the down low, their torque is just kind of up and down and all over. The horsepower looks a lot better though. Nice and linear, but lower than the rest of the field. And lastly, we don't even need to do that because there's only 1 more left. 034, going up last. Let's see what they can put down in the dyno. 034 made the second highest wheel horsepower figure of 78 wheel horsepower and 52 wheel torque, which puts them at the lowest torque out of any of the tunes. But as you see by the graph, that is one hell of a flat torque curve. Their power band for horsepower looks pretty damn good too. Significantly lower torque than everybody else, but very, very smooth. And what we have here are the 3 highest wheel horsepower tunes that we saw today. Number 1 being United Motorsport, number 2 being 034 Motorsport, and number 3 being APR. And here are their individual graphs. As you could clearly tell, United Motorsport's torque and their horsepower is drastically higher than the competitors, up until about 5,200 RPM, where they all pretty much even out. But still a tremendous achievement by United Motorsport. Smooth, linear power, but again, I'll mention the other 2 times they ran, it was up and down and even higher numbers, but this was the smoothest that they had. APR and 034, very, very similar looking graphs. And now we're going over the highest torque figures that we saw today. Tunezilla being number 1, then Unitronic, and then United Motorsport. Here are the graphs. As you guys can see, Tunezilla hits hard down low at about 2,500 RPM, but then immediately tapers off to the other 2 tunes. But then what you can see is United Motorsport holds torque longer and further in the RPM. Down low, you see that Unitronic and Tunezilla both have a little bit of a waviness going on, whereas United Motorsport is much smoother. Keep in mind, guys, the higher the torque down here, down low, this is what's gonna make a car feel fast on the street while accelerating day to day. Up top, this is the power you really wanna feel while you're racing. Holy crap, guys. Finally, the day is done. Thank you so much to Marcus from Roads Untraveled for helping me out, being the videographer for this shoot. Makes my life so much easier. It's a lot of effort that I put into these videos, especially tuning the cars back and forth, logging the cars back and forth. I hope you guys appreciate the amount of work that goes into these things. But that wraps it up for the Stage 1 91 Octane low torque files on my Mark 8 GTI. I hope you guys really enjoyed what I put together for you. Stay tuned to the channel though, I have much more coming. Stage 1 93 low torque files coming up very, very soon. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, take care.